Well, good morning. I'm glad you could join us this Sunday. Today we'll be talking about radio and local history, and it starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
You know, radio has always had a special place in my heart. I got my first job as a radio announcer when I was a sophomore in high school, but that was a long time ago, and things have changed a lot since then. We'll talk about that as well as some local history with Jim Koski. Jim is the program director and hosts a daily show on Q107 WMQT. He's also the host of Public TV 13's High School Bowl, and he's taken a special interest in local history. We'll talk about all of that. Jim, welcome back to the Ryan Report.
Well, thank you, Don. I appreciate it.
Nice to have you with us.
Yes.
Not the first time we've appeared together on camera. We did some Easter Seal telethons together.
I was trying to figure out how many there were. What, like 16 or 17 of them?
I don't remember. There were quite a few.
Yeah, there were a lot. So it's
telethons have become kind of a thing of the past.
Yeah, well, in broadcasting, a lot of things have become things of the past.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, let's let people get to know you a little bit. You are a Marquette native.
Yes, I am.
And you did go to Michigan State University for a while?
Well, I actually graduated from Michigan State University. It was actually the third of the three universities where I went, and I graduated there with a degree in telecommunications because I was interested in both radio and TV, and look where it led.
Did you work away from here at all?
Yeah, yes, I did. Once I graduated from Michigan State, I spent some time working at a TV station in Flint, and then I had the opportunity to come back to Marquette to work in radio, not at the job at which I'm currently at, but at another job. And this was after being away from Marquette for like 6 or 7 years, and I just got to the point where I thought it might be nice to go back home to be closer to family, and I had the chance to come back, worked at another radio station for a few months, and then got a call about doing afternoons at Q107 WMQT, and I've been doing it ever since.
And obviously you must like what you're doing, or you're a glutton for punishment.
Maybe a little bit of both. I often joke that I'm just too lazy to get a real job. Which is not necessarily the case. I have had a blast just about every day that I go to work, and there's probably a reason why I haven't looked for anything else over the years.
You're doing what you want to do.
I'm doing what I want to do, and I enjoy the people with whom I work, and it's a great thing. So
you've been doing this for over a quarter century.
Yeah.
I started over a half a century ago. Actually,
you're old!
I know, over 60 years ago. And at that time, we played music on records. We didn't have things like, all country or all, the music format. We played some of everything. And if we had to play a recording, it was on a reel-to-reel audio tape. So have things changed?
Things have changed immensely. I mean, you're talking about you were basically in radio's, no offense, in radio's Jurassic Age.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, when you had to do everything by hand. And it's been amazing in the 20 plus years that I've been doing radio, just exactly how much it has changed. When I started, we no longer played things off of records, but we played them off of CDs. We also played them off of cart tapes.
Sure. For
those people who don't know what cart tapes are, they're kind of like an 8-track tape.
Yeah.
If you remember what an 8-track tape was, you'd stick it in a machine and you'd play a song that way. But obviously that was not the best way to do things. And geez, a little over 20 years ago, we then became one of the first 3 stations in the state of Michigan to go fully computerized, fully automated. And now we play everything off of a computer hard drive. You just touch a button on a touch screen and it's there and it's ready to go.
And I understand if you wanted to, you could come in on the weekend and record a couple of shows. Just the intros and things you do.
Yeah.
And plug some numbers into a computer and the show would just play.
It's like I said, it's changed immensely because of the fact that you have this machine that does everything now. I think the longest we have ever gone with no one there, and this would be like over a Christmas break or something, 4.5 days.
Wow.
In which you just let the computer play and everyone gets to go home and unwrap gifts and yell at their relatives, and it's like a perfect holiday for everyone.
Nice. And you got to work with one of the legends in broadcasting, Joe Blake.
Yeah, Joe was an amazing guy. He was kind of the mentor to everyone who has ever worked with him. Joe, of course, for those of you who don't know, is in the Michigan Broadcasters Hall of Fame. He owned radio stations in Houghton and Marquette, and he may be the only other person aside from you who I know who had a 50-plus year career in broadcasting.
Well, actually, I left broadcasting.
That's true, you did for a while. while.
stayed, but we were
Yeah.
contemporaries back in the early days. So you know, you have a loyal following. How do you build that audience today?
You know, today is so different than it was 15 or 20 years ago. I think the key to it, though, is the same key that's been over the years: localism and a personal connection. I mean, nowadays, a listener has so many different options from which to choose. There's not only radio, but there's also satellite radio. There's also streaming services. You know, there are also iPods, iPhones, just about anything else. A lot of those services, though, are kind of like a jukebox. You know, you hear the music that you want, which is fine, but you don't get that local connection. You don't get to hear what the weather's like outside. You don't get to hear your neighbors calling up and requesting a song. You don't get to hear a dork go on and on and on about some obscure topic. And I think that even after all of the years and after all of the changes in the business, that's the most important thing, the one-on-one connection that you have with people.
And that's how you not only build your show, but what you try to do at your radio station that you're the program director of?
Yeah. If you go around the radio dial now, you'll notice that there are a lot of stations, like I said, that kind of sound like jukeboxes. A lot of stations get their programming via satellite from a national service, or they will just plug in announcers who aren't from the area. And that's one of the things that we have always found works in our favor, is that we have local people broadcasting from Marquette, talking about things that are important to the people in the UP, and just dealing with their lives the same way that we deal with our lives, because they're basically the same lives.
When I started in radio, if you lived in Marquette County, you had a choice of 2 radio stations, AM, JPD, and DMJ. We'll leave it at that. I'll come back with some more questions in just a minute. Back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. Talking today with Jim Koski. Jim is from Q107 WMQT. Before we leave radio, you do a lot of contests too, don't you?
Yes.
With your program.
Yes.
And with your station.
Yeah.
Kind of fun contest.
Yeah. Well, it's a way to interact with the audience and to let them get on the air and to have a lot of fun. And specifically, it allows me to indulge in some of my geeky aspects. I love movies. I love pop culture. I love UP history. So we're able to tie those into a bunch of contests. And I have found over the years that there are some really smart people out there. You can dig into an obscure fact about silent movies, or you can ask someone about something that you thought that you're the only person who knew, and all of a sudden you get phone lines lighting up, people going, yeah, I saw this and I did that, and it's been a big part of my life since then, and it's like, oh wow.
I know one of the contests you had was you tried to pick out the most popular song with the summer in it.
Yes.
What song turned out to be
that particular one was Will Smith's "Summertime."
See, mine would have been "Lazy, Crazy, Hazy Days of Summer" by Nat King Cole.
Yeah, but you were alive
Probably wasn't even on the list.
No, but then you were alive in the 1700s when the song came out.
That's
so,
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of being around very smart people, you're also the host of what Northern Michigan University calls its most popular local production, High School Bowl.
Yes.
And it's been on the air since 1977, but you just started a few years ago?
Yeah, I just wrapped up my 4th season hosting the show. Yeah.
Okay. How did you get selected to do that?
I had been doing some stuff on public TV for the Marquette Regional History Center, little bits talking about programs that were coming up. And the previous host of the show, Gigi Gordon, had decided that she wanted to step aside and do something else. And someone at Public TV 13 just said, well, Jim knows how to talk. Let's see how that turns out.
There you go. What's the biggest challenge doing that show?
The biggest challenge doing that show is just trying to understand the questions that are asked. I'd like to think that I'm fairly well read and fairly intelligent, but when we get some of these questions, which are provided by a company in New York, and they deal with things like theoretical physics or organic chemistry or something that's way above my head, I actually sit down, I read the question, I may jump onto Google or some other website to figure out what exactly I'm talking about, because you want to sound like you're intelligent when you're on the show.
You want to sound like Alex Trebek.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Alex Trebek is like the ultimate game show host, and if you can be anywhere, say within 50% of what Alex Trebek is, then you're doing an okay job.
I was going to ask you, how many of the questions do you actually know the answer to if they weren't giving them to you, do you think?
If they were giving them to me, I would probably know maybe a quarter of them.
Okay.
You know, dealing with like history and geography and you know, pop culture stuff in which I'm conversant. But like I said, once you get into science or math or anything like that, it's like.
And these kids are pretty competitive, aren't they?
Not only are these kids
They're
competitive, but they're incredibly wicked smart too. That's one of the things that I have noticed hosting that show, is that the UP has some amazing high school students, ones that I'm amazed at how many of the questions that they actually get right. Questions that I would think, oh, no one knows that, and yet they get it. And you're right about them being competitive too. I mean, like I said, these are some of the smartest kids in the UP, and you can tell that they want to make sure that everyone knows that they're some of the smartest kids in the UP.
Well, it's certainly been a favorite around the UP. You also developed an interest in local history. How did that come about?
You know, it's funny because when I was a kid growing up in Marquette, I never had much interest in local history. I remember as a little kid walking through downtown Marquette and just seeing all these railroad tracks and all these buildings that were falling apart, but it never really registered to me. And then when I came back to Marquette after leaving for a while, I started to notice some of the stuff that's around. I started to notice the reasons why certain things are the way they are. And ever since then, I have just developed an interest in, you know, trying to find out what came before, learning the stories of what made Marquette Marquette, and trying to share that with some of the people on the programs and the tours that I do for the History Center.
I know that is one of the popular things you do. You do some walking tours.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, this summer I've done tours talking about the dock system in Marquette. Last month it was also the 150th anniversary of the fire that destroyed Marquette, basically, so I did a tour on that. I've done walking tours of various neighborhoods in Marquette, South Marquette, North Marquette, the Pickle location. And one of my favorite tours, just because this is the one part of history that I find fascinating, is a tour that I did called The Other Side of the Tracks, in which I talked about the seedy part of downtown Marquette.
Okay.
Or what was at one time the seedy part of downtown Marquette.
And these have become very popular. I've seen some fairly large crowds following you around.
Yeah, whenever we do these tours, especially the walking tours, the ones that I did this summer, I was dragging 200 people around downtown Marquette talking about these things.
We'll talk about some of those in just a minute.
Okay.
Okay, we'll be back with more after we take one more break here on the Ryan Report. Once again this morning we're talking with Jim Koski from Q107 WMQT. We talked about radio, talked about local history. Let's stay on that subject for a minute. I know one of your tours involves walking around the cemetery in Marquette. What's the appeal there?
Well, you know, the Park Cemetery in Marquette is an amazing place. The land was given to the city by Peter White with the fact that it was going to be a cemetery, but also a park too. And, you know, that's why there are the ponds there, you know, there are all the animals. And it's amazing when you walk through that cemetery, you literally see Marquette's history laid out in front of you. I mean, you can walk around and see the graves of someone like Peter White or George Shiras, which are actually kind of, you know, small graves. You know, they're not ostentatious at all. You can walk up the hill, you can see where Amos Harlow, the guy who founded Marquette, is buried. And then you can walk, you know, a couple hundred feet and then see this huge mausoleum that the Kaufman family put together. And you can walking between these things, that you then see the graves of people whose names you don't know, but you know that they lived very interesting lives. And it's just one of those things where you could just spend hours upon hours just wandering around and trying to discern what happened in Marquette during a certain time.
You know, I've said frequently to a lot of people, Peter White is a library, Kaufman's an auditorium, you know, Shiras is a park, Harlow's a park. But obviously these were very important people in the history of Marquette. Yeah,
they were, and like I said, one of the things that I have always found amazing about, say, for instance, Peter White, is that unlike some of the people, he's not buried in a huge mausoleum. They have a little family obelisk, but then you just look under a tree and there's a headstone that says Peter White, you know, 1820 whatever to 1904, and the headstone's actually starting to get pushed up by the roots of a tree. You know, when you think of Peter White, you kind of think of, you know, the guy who helped Marquette become Marquette, and yet, you know, he's just buried in a very simple grave right there.
The Marquette fire, you did an extensive piece on that, and You described Marquette as a disaster waiting to happen.
Before the fire on June 11th, 1868, Marquette was really basically a frontier town. If you look at pictures from that era, there are ramshackle wooden buildings everywhere, connected by wooden sidewalks, dirt streets. You know, there was nothing in the way of urban planning. There was nothing in the way of safety regulations. Back then, Marquette did not even have any kind of fire or water system. Basically, if there was a fire, they would bring water up from Lake Superior and try to put the fire out. And when the fire occurred on June 11th, 1868, it was one of those very dry, windy days in Marquette. And the fire started in the workshop of the Marquette and Ontonagon Railroad, and just like that, it spread. The wind was blowing the sparks all over the place. Someone who wrote a letter at the time said that the sparks were as big as his hand. And so they were just blowing on all of these wooden buildings, and within 4 hours, what we now think of as downtown Marquette, from Baraga up to Ridge, and then from the lake to 4th Street, was totally destroyed. And the only reason that the fire did not destroy the rest of the city where all the people lived was that what we now call Baraga was then called Superior Street, and it was designed to be Marquette's main street, and it was 100 feet wide, and the fire could not jump that street. If the street had been narrower, the fire would have blown over it, and perhaps the entire city of Marquette would have been destroyed.
Wow, it's just amazing. I think I read over 100 buildings were destroyed.
Over 100 buildings were destroyed. There was what is now the equivalent of $26 million in damage done, only 20% of which was covered by insurance, by the way. But the fire actually did leave one amazing legacy. When you think about it, like I said, before the fire, everything was made out of wood, and it was just, built ramshackle. Right. The city then decided that in such a tightly packed area as a downtown, you cannot do that. So they said to business owners, you have a choice. You can either make your buildings out of brick, or you can make them out of some other locally available material, which in our case happens to have been sandstone, quarried in South Marquette. And because of that, because of the fire, we have all of these gorgeous sandstone buildings that are still sitting in Marquette that we might not have seen if it wasn't for that fire. Unfortunately,
we're just about out of time. Speaking of history, you also, you and your wife traveled to Europe, don't you?
Yes.
Is there kind of a theme to that as well?
Well, my wife is a World War II researcher in that she is trying to find the stories of the 244 men and women from Marquette and Alger County who died during World War II. And so we will head over there to explore the areas in which they served and in which they died, and try to put a little context into the stories that she's been told by the family and families and have found out in the newspaper.
How many countries have you been to? What were some of the countries you've been to?
Eight or nine. It's France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Germany, Austria, the Netherlands, Poland, England, and I'm probably missing one.
I think that's enough. You've got so much history. I just wish we had a lot more time to chat about it some more. And it's just been a lot of fun. Maybe we'll have to do it again.
I'm up for it.
Okay. Thanks a lot for coming in.
Not
Jim.
a problem, Don.
Okay. We'll see you.
Yep.
All right.
Okay.
Back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. Henny Youngman was the master of the 1 and 2 liners. Let me give you a sample. Well, my wife told me the car wasn't running well. Water in the carburetor. I said, "Where's the car?" She said, "It's in the lake." Most of us like to laugh. It's fun. It usually means we feel good. Laughter can be infectious. We hear someone else laugh and it makes us want to laugh. Laughing at a comedian's joke is one thing, but let me ask you this. Have you ever felt like laughing at an inappropriate time? Have you ever been involved in a serious matter when something struck you as funny and you knew that laughing was not the right thing to do, but you did it anyway because you couldn't help it? It's true, laughter can also have a downside. Let me tell you about one of the challenges those of us who work in the broadcast media sometimes encounter. It's those times when we're on the air and something strikes us as especially funny, and it causes us to laugh at one of those inappropriate times. A veteran news anchor here at TV6 tells the story about working with a young woman co-anchor when they were reporting a story about a company that had an unusual name. This was like so many cases when you can just sense that your partner is starting to lose it, and it's contagious, and you both start to giggle or chuckle or sometimes even break out in a full-fledged laugh. Even though we know that laughing inappropriately in the middle of a newscast is not acceptable, Sometimes it just happens. You can't stop it. It's uncontrollable. There's some kind of mechanism in our brain that ignores the caution flag that says, if you laugh, you're in trouble. And so you do. And sometimes you pay the price. In the case of the story I was just telling you about the station's advertising clients, they wound up canceling their contract. I know the story would be better if I told you the name of the sponsor, but those people were already offended once, so I don't want to do it again. Back in the early days of TV6, the people who ran the cameras in the studio would often deliberately try to make the on-air people laugh during the newscast, and they were sometimes successful. We've become a lot more professional since then. I guess you could say it's always a bittersweet experience. Having a good laugh is a lot of fun, but it's a problem when it gets in the way of getting the job done. It's even worse when you embarrass yourself live on the air. Of course, I can do that in a lot of ways. So far, I made it through another week without that happening. Let's leave with one more laugh from Henny Youngman. A patient says, "Doctor, it hurts when I do this." The doctor said, "Then don't do that." I'll be back in a minute. Well, it's time for us to wrap it up for another week. The Today Show is just around the corner. Remember, if you miss our show or want to see it again, you can find it at uppermichigansource.com. Today's show will be available starting tomorrow afternoon. All of the episodes from the past 2 years are there now. Thanks to Jim Koski for coming in this morning so we could reminisce about radio and learn some things about local history. And thank you for being here. I hope we can get together at this same location next Sunday morning.